Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I really wanted to sort of touch on the whole ethos of Lewisham's history in terms of its community engagement and how it impacts on what's happening globally. And I think actually one of the biggest issues that we have in our community at the moment, and which we probably have as a national problem, is actually apathy and poor policy. So the two things that really are holding everybody back from doing what they want to do is really people's sense that everything is so big, everything is so large, that what can they do to make a difference? Everything seems to be beyond their reach. Everything seems to be about a policy that somebody else has set. And how do you get control back of your community, whether it's the buildings that are on your street, that years ago used to be named after people and events that took place, which now become Kent Wharf or Bowsprit Point, which have no real connection to where you live. And the one thing that unites everybody in every community is the sense of community is built from history and heritage. So the one thing when you speak to young people, when you speak to old people, whether they're black, white, young, old, whatever their economic status, the one thing that always binds them all is the sense of pride and sense of identity in where they live. And I think we seem to have sort of, COVID to a certain extent sort of changed that. It sort of gave us, particularly in Lewisham, which has such an amazing history of community activism and community engagement, it really reminded us what an amazing borough we lived in. During COVID, we had more than 300 COVID mutual groups started up. Almost every street in Lewisham had a community support group. And at the time when there's so much apathy and everybody feels everything is so much, how do we get engaged with our local community projects? How do we get the best out of our communities? The COVID disaster really sort of showed what was good about us all as individuals. In fact, I would argue that COVID made us all anarchists, because it showed us all as individuals that we didn't need unions, we didn't need political parties, we didn't need governments, we didn't need the council. When we had people in our community needing help, we stepped up to the mark. And whether you had a skateboard or a mobility scooter, whatever you did, you found a way to help your neighbours. And that's one thing that I think the world shares, whether you're sort of working class or how you identify as a community, is something that is shared globally wherever we are. And Lewisham, and one of the key things I think that is binding in the sense of community identity is housing, and the importance of having a home and that security that a house brings you into your community. And in the 1960s, Lewisham was the groundmark borough in the UK for housing. The most exciting housing projects, whether it was green housing, whether it was cooperative housing, whether it was green builds, all happened in Lewisham. The models for social housing around the world were all started here in Lewisham in the 1960s. In fact, what is quite bizarre is the Sanford Co-op, which is one of the most successful housing co-ops in the UK, which is based in New Cross, have not just created a wonderful place to live and beautiful housing which is affordable and a sense of community which means that people live there are able to support each other to tackle mental health, to support a loneliness, and that sense of comradeship that you get from being good neighbours. And that model has become so successful that the profit it makes, and it makes a profit, funds other housing projects around the UK. And so you do wonder, with housing being such a huge issue, and Lewisham being so great with its history on housing, why we don't do more to instill that sense of housing engagement and that importance of home within everybody that lives in our community. One of the key things when I grew up, I was raised on a council estate, and one of the things we always had, we didn't have any money, we didn't have grants, we didn't have loans. We as a community, if we needed something, we funded it. We'd have bingo nights, we'd have luncheon nights. We'd have a community centre which was funded from a levy. Every council tenant would pay about 50p in those days, I think it was, a week on your rent was used to fund the community centre. And the community centre would be where everybody went, whether you were young, old, whatever your economic status was, everybody used their community centre. And what was really powerful about the community centre was that if you had disabilities, you used the community centre. Whatever your gender, whether you're a refugee or an asylum seeker or just an old person on your own, you went to your community centre. And the community centre was not just about that community engagement, empowerment of people, but it was also the place where individuals could learn to be volunteers, and people could learn that process of getting involved, about the difference you can make as an individual, transforming people's lives, not because of your own personal wealth or your own personal abilities, but just because sometimes being able to volunteer, whether it's a luncheon club or a children's toddler group or even a green environmental group, can be transformative, not just to you, but the people and the community in which you live. And so it's like, again, it's really, really sad that we've lost that sense of our community spaces. And you look around Lewisham, and I've been campaigning for years to get some sort of audit so that we actually know where all of our community spaces are, and there's greater cohesion between one group and another so that we can build that in, because it's not always about money. Most of what's achieved around our communities, whether it's Lewisham or Southwark or Glasgow, is achieved by people who find ways and solutions to deal with problems or ways of improving their environment. And it's not always about money. One of the crazy things about the volunteering movement, there's two big issues. Now, I really want to highlight where things are going wrong and where, hopefully, in here amongst you, you may not be aware of these issues and how we need to change them. So, at my food bank, we used to have 28 young people that volunteered at the food bank, and they were all on universal credit. And some of them had special needs, and some of them, in one particular case, she was a Chinese sex worker who had been rescued from the Home Office, and she was placed in our care to learn English to get her confidence up so that she could get back into society. And then about 4 months ago, the government decided that they actually needed everybody to work rather than be volunteers. And they changed the regulations that meant that people who volunteered could no longer volunteer as charity volunteers, which is completely crazy. So, for example, a lot of our volunteers had special needs. By being volunteers, it built up their self-confidence, it built up their identity, their self-worth, and nearly all of them now work for other organisations across South East London as a direct consequence of being volunteers. But the government's viewpoint was, well, if you're a volunteer, you're not available to work. And you think to yourself, well, they're volunteering, they're learning skills that we need, they're contributing, and when they get that job, they may give up their volunteering and they might do that volunteering job. And what worries me as a volunteer in this community is that most of the volunteering organisations you see around this borough are run predominantly by older people who have the time, but a lot of the younger people just can't get engaged because there's so many barriers about getting people involved. We have huge numbers of young people under 16. Years ago, we would have people 12, 13, 14 would come and work with us in our different projects. The government now has brought in this law that anybody under the age of 16, if they want to volunteer, need to be supervised. So if you're a charity shop or a community project, we'd love to have young people working with us, but we can't, because to take them on, we also need a supervisor to supervise and be responsible for the care of that young person. So we're really, all the things that engage us, all the things that we used to do for free, are becoming more and more problematic. And it's getting to the stage where voluntary groups and voluntary sector now are not just struggling for volunteers because all the barriers are being put up against them, but the other big issue which is coming in, where we're finding that it's all about tick boxes and funding targeting. So this is sort of a really, really crazy issue, that we are in Broccoli Ward, where our food bank is, and in order to get assembly money, we have to feed a certain number of people that live in the ward. A percentage of our clients have to come from Broccoli Ward. Now the crazy thing is that because we're a charity that welcomes anybody in crisis through our door, most of our people come from the whole of Lewisham. And so therefore, even though we feed, and this week we passed the 4,000 member mark at We Care at Cass Place, we can't get funding from Brockley because we feed too many people that don't come from Brockley Ward, even though more people in Brockley Ward come to We Care at Cass Place than any other charity in Brockley. It's nuts. We can't get any government funding or council funding, even though we feed more people in this borough than any other, including the Trust of Trusts. They have nowhere near the numbers that we look after. We can't get funding because our policy is supporting anyone in a crisis that walks through our door. And the way the funding models and all the budgeting is going at the moment is focusing on targeting one group or another. So you have like, and I don't mean this as a racist or an offensive, I'm just trying to sort of give you a factual situation, because we have refugees and asylum seekers who work with us. If I had a charity that only did the homeless or only did refugees, I would get well funded. But because our thing is to include refugees and to include the disabled and single, we can't get funding. And so it's, when you hear all these organisations saying it's always about money, it's not about money. There's huge amounts of money which is available for feeding people, for community cohesion, but it's allocated not by numbers or need, but by ticking a box, which may not necessarily be the best way to spend that money. And what you need is more cohesion within a community. So, for example, we have refugees and asylum seekers and homeless people that come to Cass Place, and what they love about it is that they can go in the shop and they can find clothes that they want to wear and they get them for free. And what they love is that it's not a clothes rail that says, oh, that's for the homeless people, or a clothes rail for refugees. They are treated equally. And one of the things that we all want, and what we're all human, and we know we're a refugee or we know we're homeless. What we want is to go somewhere where we can engage with other people and be part of the wider society. And even homeless funding, this is how crazy it is, that a lot of homeless people come to us who have had addiction problems. And most of the homeless projects in this area will link them with other people that have also had alcohol and addiction problems. The problem with that is that once they get their council flat or they get their housing association flat, they want that as an opportunity. They don't want to go backwards. And so by going back to the charities that they've come from, they feel they're going backwards rather than forwards. And that leads to not progression. And it works against community cohesion. So I think that when we're involved with like local politics and when we're in organisations where there's funding, it's really important that people start to stop ticking the boxes and recognise that poverty, for example, impacts the poorest, the black, the brown community the worst, the disabled community the worst. And the way you can address that is by treating people equally. And interestingly, that is starting to move. The mayor of London has just brought in school dinners for primary school children. Personally, I think it should be all school children, but it's primary school children for 9 months. It's really important. He's getting a lot of stick because people say there's some parents that can afford to pay for their kids' luncheons. The problem with this is that the kids that presently get school lunches have to have an income, a household income of less than £8,000 a year. We all know that in London, £8,000 a year is a joke, and most people even would struggle on £25,000 a year, particularly with the rents in London if you're not a council tenant. And so making it universal is the fairest way of doing it. You stop the stigmatisation of children, you treat all children equally, and then as those children grow up into society, they learn more about each other rather than, oh, here's the rich kid in school or she's the rich girl in the class. And I think it's really important that we need to be focused about our community engagement from a more cohesive and a universal perspective rather than a costing and a ticking a box, because ticking a box is working against us. The money is not going where it's needed, and organisations like mine, which fed so many people, if it wasn't at Christmas the support of Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, who set up a crowdfunder for us, we would have closed at Christmas. So It's not always about an organisation that is the best that gets all the funding. Sometimes it's that one that has the expertise in ticking the boxes that gets all the money. So I think it's really, really important. The other thing I think that we seem to have missed, and to a certain extent we take for granted here, and which is changing around the world, is Deptford is a really hugely creative community. We have the best artists on the planet are in Goldsmith and New Cross and Deptford. I mean, we're blessed with so much talent. And what depresses me every Christmas is you go to Deptford High Street and you get that sad Christmas tree and you think, we have the most creative people on the planet in this borough. Can't you give it to Goldsmiths as a student project to create a wonderful, exciting thing that could attract lots of people to come to Deptford? So there's lots of things we could be doing. And again, it wouldn't cost any money. So I think that those things we do, and street art is so undervalued, okay, so undervalued. Street art, when it really improves not just people's sense of where they belong and the sense of well-being and their mental well-being, it makes people feel good. And I want to give sort of 3 brief examples of this. When we painted our building, our mural on Friendly Street, everybody said, oh, don't bother doing that. People would trash it, people would destroy it. Cass Place is the only building in South East London with black shutters. And what I mean by black shutters is that we're the only building that doesn't get tagged or graffiti, because everybody in our community knows that the space and the facilities we offer are inclusive for everybody. It's not one group above another. And when you are somebody that's inclusive, people respect and value what you do. When you actually have things which are against one group or another, or seem to fund one group above another, then you end the hate and the bigotry and the ignorance that feeds a really non-cohesive community. And so I think street art's really important. In Athens, when they had the big recession, they had all the problems in Athens. They had no money and they had no jobs. But what they did, if any of you are fortunate enough to go to Athens, they got out their paintbrushes and they painted every building. If you wander around Athens, it's an absolute joy, the street art, that how it's just transformed the whole of the town. But you don't have to go as far as Athens. You look at Margate. You go to Margate, most people will love the art and would talk about the art more than they would talk about the Turner Museum or the beach. And yet these pieces of art were done for free by local artists in the local community. And if they needed some paint, they'd just go a crowdfunder and raise the money. And the same thing's happening in Folkestone. If you take a trip to Folkestone, it's not far away from St John's. The whole of Folkestone has been completely transformed by art and street art. And it's just wonderful to behold, because it makes you feel good even if you've got no money and you're wandering around with an empty pocket and you don't know when your last pound is going to come. It's really uplifting for the soul and the mind. And last month we were really proud. Boudica Collins, who did our mural on our building in Friendly Street, came with us to Scotland. Kirkcaldy is the hometown of Kath Duncan, who I do a lot of work with around what she did in Lewisham over many years, but she basically came from Scotland. And I've been trying for years to get a blue plaque. I said, how come the most important woman, civil rights history, a Scot, is not recognised in Scotland? Part of the reason is she was queer, part of the reason she was a communist, which has never been called, but at the end of the day, she was an amazing woman. And I couldn't get a plaque, and I couldn't get a street sign, and I couldn't get anything. And I battled for 10 years and got nowhere. And then a building came up, and then the town centre decided that they had enough money to redevelop the town centre in Kirkcaldy. And so I said, well, give me the wall of a building and I'll do something with it. So we were the last project for the town hall to be approved for the town centre approval. We couldn't get any money, so we crowdfunded. We raised all the money we needed from local people, £1 here, £2 there. And we've created the Kirkcaldy People's Mural in Kirkcaldy. And again, as we were painting this backwater in Kirkcaldy, which is next to an abandoned shopping centre, which will be knocked down and converted into nice flats with trees, but everybody said, oh, the kids will trash it, people will ruin it, people will splash paint on it, they'll write graffiti over it. It's been there about a month now. Everybody loves it. It's engaging people. They're talking about creating an arts community around this piece of art. It's the first piece of art in the town. Other people are now looking to do their shops to copy it. It's improving community cohesion. And when you have development, which most people fear, when you have it from an art and creative perspective, you bring the people with you. And through that, from Deptford to Scotland, is another example through art, which is not about money, it's about how we look at the buildings around us and what we do with them and how we create them for everybody to enjoy in an inclusive way. Who we put on those walls, whether we just paint like in Folkestone, some of the walls just are bunches of flowers, or just a splash of colour. It doesn't matter, but it's just that splash of colour in dark times is what gives people so much joy. I think it's really, really important. The other thing, it's easy to forget, we talked about Sandford Housing Co-op and its power that it's achieved. When we first opened in 2014 on New Cross Road, we had lots of young men that had no work, and we heard about this green energy thing that was coming in. So we linked up with Lewisham College, and we started training all of our people that were on benefits to do the new skill training, because green assessors would be paid £500-600 a week, some of them 800. Thought that's a really good job. So we got all of our people at the food bank all signed up with Lewisham College, and we were all training them up to be green assessors. And then the government came along and said, oh well, we've run out of money for that project, we've got to stop that. And so we thought, what do we do when we've got all this green initiative in our borough? What do we do? So we said, why don't we use the roofs of schools, community centres and our buildings to generate green energy? The government will pay us, we can put panels on the roof, the energy will be paid by the government, and we can maybe do a share offer or something and raise the money from people that have got a bit of money that want to spend it ethically. And now that became the South East London Community Energy Organisation, which exists to this day, has an income of nearly £1 million a day. It's transformed schools, community centres and churches in Lewisham and Greenwich, particularly now when there's an energy crisis. So by using this thing, starting a food bank with just people coming together to do it, it's dealt with their energy crisis. So whether many of food banks, luncheon clubs, breakfast clubs are facing closure because their energy bills have gone from a few £100s to thousands of pounds. And when you hear this story about 2,500 cap, you speak to any community centre, their bills at the moment are 30,000 plus 30,000, not 2,500. And there's no relief for charities. You can see the difference it makes. So that's another example that what we could be doing is doing more green things, which aren't always about using state money, but actually coming together to think of a building, a school, a community centre, or a building we have that we may be able to link in with Stelsey or another organisation to tackle fuel poverty, but also to produce a little bit of income to actually sustain our projects going forward. There's two other jobs. This is really going global now. I mean, when last February, I was wandering around Deptford High Street and noticed I spent a fortune on Deptford Station. I thought, how can you spend all that money and then leave two grotty phone boxes that are trashed right at the entrance? So you get off Deptford Station, the first thing you see are two phone boxes that are public toilets that are full of rubbish. And so I went on Twitter on the Monday and said, why is it, BT, that you allow this to happen? We in Deptford deserve better. And on the Wednesday morning, I got a text from BT saying, send me your email. Sent them my email. And they said, well, what would you do with it? And I had no idea what I was going to do with the phone box. And I said, well, I'll turn it into a community hub. And I said, oh yeah, we'd quite like that idea. So the next day, they sent me another email and said, we're selling you the phone box for £1, okay, for £1. So I said, all right, we'll do that. So the next day the contract came. Within 10 days, we had bought the phone box on Deptford High Street for £10. And we opened it on Valentine's Day last year with drag queens singing Under the Rainbow, because it's under the Rainbow Bridge and it disabled. It was a lovely experience, and it was, being creative with no space and no money. And the reason I'm telling this story is that this little phone box this week won the International Award from Urban Architectures, voted it's the best use of a phone box in Britain. It's now copied and been duplicated around the world. There's bus shelters in France, in Greece, in Germany, in Brazil, in South Africa, in Canada, which have copied the phone box model of creating a community centre where you put local information. If you have things you don't want, you share it. If you need help with something, you put a notice on the notice board. And that little phone box, again, everybody said to me, Ray, within a week, people will be trashing it, they'll be stealing from it. And yet the scale and the success of that phone box has been beyond, our wildest dreams. The range of people that use it, the people that are engaged. It's only 1 square foot of space. And yet most people we could just justifiably say it's transformed an entire community, just that one phone box. And so it's like trying to encourage you to think there's no space that's too small to make a difference. And there's no space too large not to try or dream to make a difference. And I just want to come on to my slides because it's not just here that's happening. I mean, the phone box and Cass Place are now inspiring people globally. And I'm really proud of that. But I really want to tell you about this. This is one of the most amazing stories you will ever hear. And I heard about this story, and this is the power of politics, okay? So in Spain, with all the upheaval around the world, all the different movements have been found and formed and got into government. We have different, some you like, some you don't like. But in Spain, they have a little party called Podemos, which was a community-driven party which got into power, just relatively recent. And they started to come up with some really, really radical solutions. So this is a wonderful woman called Marie. She's a mum, she's got 3 kids. She had drug addiction, alcohol addiction. She lived on the streets for years. Her children were taken into care. And Podemos came up with the idea, how do we tackle mental health, people in this crisis that are trying to get their lives better but can't work in the normal way? And so the Spanish government came up with this idea, well, how about road sweepers, street cleaners? We don't need to give them a fixed day or working schedule, we just give them an area. And what we would do is give them a broom and a dustpan and we would get them to clean these streets. Now, what's so extraordinary about this whole project is not the fact that these streets are perfectly clean, is that Marie, on her own in just this one town, suddenly became the voice of the village, voice of the town. When there was an old lady on their own that couldn't get out that day, oh Marie, as you swept the street, can you help me, can you do this? And suddenly the whole community cohesion started to be built around Marie. And because Marie had mental health and drug issues and alcohol addictions, people were more supportive but also caring and understanding and supportive. So if Marie was feeling crap one day, the neighbours, all the women would get out and they'd sweep the street. As a direct consequence of this, mental health funding in Spain has been reduced by 48%. Fly tipping is down by 92%. And that's just, and they're still paying them just road sweeper wages. And it's just transforming. Marie now is getting her kids back out of care. She's rebuilt her life on the basis of cleaning that street. And that's just Marie. But in every town and every village in Spain, this is the reality. If you go to Malaga, get out the airport, you go to the car park, you could eat off that car park's floor. You wander around Deptford, it's a very different story. Even when we as members here try and clear up the street, it doesn't work. And the reason being is we are not engaged. If we knew the name of our road sweepers, and if we knew our dustman, and we knew who our postman was, some of us do, but if we all did it, made a positive impact, that would transform the streets. So for example, with Marie, nobody would throw a cigarette butt on the ground because they know they'll upset Marie. Nobody would throw their crisp packets on the ground for exactly the same reason. They value where they live. It's improved the town centre, it's improved people's well-being, and it's done wonders for community cohesion. And I think this is a model, when we've got no money, that could work, because we showed through the COVID crisis how important NHS workers were. And we really sort of, started to think about the value of people in our society. And I think one of the joys I have where I live in St John's is seeing my street when it's swept and knowing the guy swept it. And that gives me joy. whatever your gender, whatever your economic status, I'm sure that's the same for all of you. And then I just want to come through to the last slide, which is where Spain, it may be going a bit crazy. And this is the latest thing, and I'm slightly alarmed by this. And this is, I'm sort of coming to the end. Spain now wants to tackle waste and food waste and the energy crisis. And so what Podemos has done is it's started to create these kitchens inside its supermarkets. And the concept is that you'll go to your local supermarket and you cook and you eat within your supermarket. So instead of buying 6 eggs, you buy what you need. You cook it in their kitchen, you wash it up, put it away and you leave. So you could be there 3 times a day. What is there so extraordinary about this? It's stopped waste. They don't have the waste, it's against the law now to have food waste. And people come and they cook their breakfast and their lunch and they have their 1 egg or their half a bowl of cereal, but they only eat what they need, so there's no waste. They have more disposable income because they're not buying 100 lemons in Deptford market just to get the price. And so it tackles food waste, it tackles poverty, it tackles poor health. The concern I have with it, and this is really going back to housing, I spent most of my life on the council estate, and one of the positive aspects of council housing was the right to buy. And people go, oh God, the terrible right to buy. What was good, and there is bad things about the right to buy, but what I want to say about the right to buy and where this links in, is that the right to buy policy meant that on my estate, I meant doctors and nurses and teachers. It meant that our estates, and you go around Deptford and you see how lovely our council estates are and the people that live there, it meant that our areas became not sink estates, but real communities where people took pride in their estates, got involved in their tenants movement. Where it went wrong, of course, was that they didn't put restrictions in the lease that would have meant that if you wanted to sell your house, you could only sell it at a lower price, and that you could only rent it back to the council because technically it was us subsidising somebody's right to buy. So it was where the impact of the policy, the good part was it created good community cohesion on council estates, but the bad part was that it was ill thought out and most of those properties are now owned by private landlords. So sometimes you have a good policy that has bad repercussions, and sometimes you have what seems a good policy and it has bad repercussions. This concept, what worries me, is that if all the supermarkets start cooking and offering food in this way, then we lose that sense of community. So there's no breakfast lunches, there's no community kitchens. All the things that bring us together around the table will be gone, even family gatherings, because the supermarket is such an easy option. Oh, I don't need to worry about the washing up. I don't even need Deliveroo. I can just go to the supermarket. So sometimes it seems like a great idea, and your thoughts at the end of it will be welcome. But my own concern with it is I think it's a level too far, and the repercussions could be that instead of tackling one problem, it could boost another, i.e. loneliness and isolation by addressing one problem. Because I don't think always solutions are thought through long enough and with great care. And then I'm just sort of saying my last thing is that with all my work's always been about telling the stories of others and inspiring people. I think the most powerful thing about living in Lewisham is the amazing people that live in Lewisham and do amazing work, and it's we should be so proud of what goes on in our borough. And it saddens me there's no blue plaques and there's no history trails for all the amazing stuff that happens in Lewisham, because there's more amazing people come from Lewisham than anywhere else on the planet, historically. And my film, and I'm just going on there, that I got so fed up with fighting everybody. And people always say, oh, there's no money, you can't do this and you can't do it. Which is why I did the mural, why I do the shop, why I did the phone box. I never accept no, never accept no. I'm fortunate I started poor, I started homeless, and I made a success of my life and I became better off. And I never forgot where I came from, which is what drives me, although people resent me for it sometimes. But I made this film called Liberty. I originally made a play. And I really I found that the stories of people, whether it's a New Cross fire, Kath Duncan, the civil rights protests, the hunger marches, the energy battles of the 1930s, all took part in Deptford. In the 1930s, Kath Duncan marched 30,000 people from Deptford Broadway onto the gasworks on the Old Kent Road. And she did it because the gasworks were planning an energy tariff on the poor. And so she laid siege, 30,000 people from Deptford laid siege to the gasworks until the gasworks decided that it wasn't worth the hassle and they dropped the planned tax on the poor. Can you imagine 30,000 people today marching from Deptford on any gasworks? The apathy is too great, and so I've made this film, and it's an advert for my film. It's being screened in June at Hatcham House, which is the first community centre that was in our area, in our borough, where people used to meet, the hunger marches, the anti-fascist movements, all the big protests of the 30s and 40s were all organised at Hatcham House. It's now been converted into luxury flats, but they've saved a small part of the hall, which is a community room, and they use that and they hire it out for functions as a charity. And I'm screening my film there because that's where Kath was. And my film really tells for the first time the story of how civil rights activists in Lewisham won the right to free speech and the right to protest, how people in Lewisham influenced the world through the civil rights. And the first civil rights case in law was Kath Duncan and her civil rights case. Liberty was their first legal case in Britain, was Kath Duncan. And it's just shameful that our history and our power is not told and not known. And so I made this film to tell this story about how people inspire others, how everybody starts ordinary, but events make you extraordinary. So I made this film, and I'm not a filmmaker, I just made the film, and I got things together, and I just said, will you do this, and will you do that? And I was so embarrassed when I made the film, because it has black and white film, and it has recreations, there's lots going on, and it covers so much, from Reclaim Pride to the anti-fascist movement, to the importance of the New Cross Fire, to the black movement in Britain. But I thought nobody's going to work this film out, so I put it secretly out through the Film Festival Network. And it's now won, as of today, 27 International Film Awards, which is quite mind-blowing, considering I'm only one short of being the most successful queer film ever made. And I've been screened in Uganda through the censor, which is actually a crime to screen my film because it's LGBT driven, although it's not just about LGBT. And it's got through the Iran censor. The reason they're showing it in Iran is because the film is shot. I wanted to tell history in a different way that is relevant now, so it inspires people now. And so, of course, Kath and all the people were protesting against the king, parliament, and social justice. And so, of course, the Iranian government have put it through the censor and allowed it because it shows Western people protesting against the British government and the king. So even though it was like 40, 50 years ago, it's got through the censors. And then in China, it got through the China censors because Kath Duncan is the only Western communist who fits the acceptable brief of a Western communist leader. And so my film has now got, 1.5 billion watchers in China. And so a film about the people that shaped Lewisham and that inspire me every day to do what I do, and that are your neighbours of the past, some of them are present, are shaping the world today. They're inspiring people in Uganda, in Iran, in China, in New York, in Glasgow, in Liverpool. It's Lewisham's power, and we have such an amazing community, and it's really important we fight to save it, and we do whatever we can to keep the strength and keep community cohesion. And even with all the buildings that go on that seem to turn us into Croydon or Dubai, that we try and remember our roots is an extraordinary history and heritage we can all be justly proud of. We need to be more proud of it, we need to be more proactive, and we need to really work harder at supporting and building greater community cohesion for everybody, not one group above another. So thank you for that.